Are you serious? You imbecile! You ruined my suit!
The restaurant fell silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence that comes when people are savoring their meals. This was different. This was the heavy, suffocating silence that fills a room when something terrible is happening and nobody knows whether to look away or watch. The kind of silence that makes your stomach turn because you know someone's dignity is being stripped away right in front of your eyes. Marcus Harrington stood in the center of Billionaire, the city's most exclusive Italian restaurant, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. He was a billionaire CEO, a tech mogul. His face had graced the cover of Forbes magazine 3 times. His net worth was estimated at $12 billion. $12 billion. The kind of money that could change entire communities. The kind of wealth that made people nervous in his presence. The kind of power that made waiters stumble over their words and managers bend over backward to please him. Are you deaf or just incompetent? His words hit like slaps. 23-year-old Shanice Williams stood frozen, her serving tray trembling in her hands. The water she'd accidentally spilled on his $10,000 suit was still dripping onto the marble floor. Each drop echoed in the terrible silence. Every eye in the restaurant had turned toward her. 50 pairs of eyes, 50 witnesses to her humiliation. The kind of attention that burns your skin, the kind that makes you want to disappear into the floor. Shanice's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd been carrying a full tray of water glasses, moving carefully between the tightly packed tables the way she'd done 1,000 times before. But Marcus had leaned back in his chair without looking, without warning, extending his arm just as she passed. The collision was inevitable. The tray tipped. The water went everywhere. His suit, his shirt, his expensive leather shoes. It was an accident. Anyone with eyes could see it was an accident. But Marcus Harrington didn't care about accidents. He cared about respect. And in his world, people like Shanice owed him respect simply for existing in his presence. I asked you a simple question, Marcus continued, his tone icy with contempt. Each word was carefully chosen, deliberately cruel. Do you even understand English, or did they just hire you because they needed to fill a diversity quota? The racism wasn't even subtle. He didn't bother hiding it, didn't dress it up in polite language. Why would he? In his experience, there were never consequences for men like him. He could say whatever he wanted, do whatever he wanted, and the world would bend to accommodate him. Shanice's throat tightened. She'd worked at Billionaire for 2 years. 2 years of perfect service, never a complaint, never a mistake. She knew the menu by heart, knew which customers preferred their water with lemon and which ones wanted extra Parmesan on their pasta. She'd built relationships with regulars who requested her section specifically. She was good at her job. She was proud of her work. Until tonight, until him. Before I continue, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story gets intense, and you'll want to follow along for what happens next. Trust me. "I'm so sorry, sir," Shanice managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let me get you—" "Let me guess," Marcus interrupted, looking her up and down with pure disgust. His eyes traveled from her face to her uniform to her shoes, like she was something he'd scraped off the bottom of his expensive loafers. Community college dropout? Baby mama? Food stamps? He turned to his dinner companions, 3 other billionaires in tailored suits who sat uncomfortably at the table, their eyes darting between Marcus and Shanice. "This is what happens when you lower standards. You get this." The word "this" hung in the air like poison. He didn't even use her name, didn't see her as human, just this, just a problem, just an inconvenience in his perfect evening. Some of his companions chuckled nervously, not because they thought it was funny, but because they were afraid. Afraid of contradicting a man with that much power. Afraid of being on the receiving end of his cruelty. So they laughed, and in doing so, they became part of her humiliation. The manager rushed over, practically running across the restaurant floor.
Vincent was a middle-aged Italian man who'd always been kind to Shanice, who'd given her extra shifts when her mother got sick, who'd complimented her work ethic and promoted her to the evening shift where the tips were better. But right now, as he looked at Marcus Harrington's furious face and then at Shanice's trembling form, she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was choosing, and she already knew who he would choose. "Mr. Harrington, I am so deeply sorry," Vincent said, his accent thicker than usual in his panic. "Please, let us comp your entire meal. We will take care of your suit, dry cleaning, replacement, whatever you need." Then he turned to Shanice, and his eyes said everything his mouth couldn't. "You're done." Other waitstaff looked away. They couldn't meet her eyes. They felt bad for her, sure, but not bad enough to risk their own jobs. Not bad enough to speak up. Carlos, who trained her when she first started, suddenly became very interested in adjusting the silverware on table 7. Maria, who she'd covered for countless times when she needed to leave early for her kids, pretended to be taking an order on the other side of the room. Customers whispered. She could hear fragments of their conversations. So unprofessional. Can you believe it? They really should be more careful who they hire. They'd already decided, already judged, already found her guilty of ruining a billionaire's evening. And Shanice stood there drowning in humiliation, her dignity stripped away in front of 50 strangers. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Her chest felt tight like someone was standing on it. Her hands still shook, but she kept her head up. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. What Marcus Harrington didn't know, what nobody in that restaurant knew, was that Shanice Williams was holding the one secret that could destroy his entire empire. A secret she'd discovered 3 weeks ago while working her second job cleaning offices at night. A secret that revealed Marcus Harrington wasn't the self-made genius he pretended to be. A secret that would expose him as a fraud and a thief. And she was about to use it. Shanice didn't cry, not in front of them. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction, wouldn't let them see her break. So she held it together as she turned away from the dining room, her shoulders straight, her head up, even though everything inside was screaming. She walked to the back of the restaurant, past the kitchen where the heat from the ovens hit her like a wall, past the line cooks who stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. These people had become like family over the past 2 years. They'd celebrated her birthday with a cake during their break. They'd pooled money together when her mother first got sick. They'd covered her shifts when she had exams at night school. And now they watched her walk by with concern in their eyes, but nobody said anything. Nobody could. They all knew what happened when you crossed people like Marcus Harrington. She pushed through the door to the employee bathroom and locked it behind her. Only then, in the privacy of that small, fluorescent-lit space, did she let her shoulders drop. Only then did she let herself breathe. Shanice stared at herself in the mirror. The reflection looking back at her showed exhaustion that went deeper than one bad night. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, but from too many late nights and too little sleep. Her uniform, which she'd ironed that morning before her shift, was still damp from the spilled water. Her hands, which had finally stopped shaking, gripped the edge of the sink so hard her knuckles turned pale. 3 jobs. She worked 3 jobs. Breakfast shift at a diner across town, evening shift here at Bellinote, and overnight, from midnight to 6 in the morning, she cleaned office buildings downtown. Night school twice a week, studying business management because she'd promised herself she wouldn't be serving tables forever. And all of it, every single hour of work, every missed hour of sleep was for her mother. Diabetes medication that insurance wouldn't cover, doctor visits that cost more than their rent, a woman who'd raised Shanice alone, who'd worked herself to the bone to give her daughter a chance, and who now needed Shanice to do the same. And now this, publicly humiliated by a man who wouldn't notice if $1 million disappeared from his account, a man who probably spent more on one dinner than Shanice made in a month, a man who saw her as nothing, as this. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Shanice?" It was Vincent's voice, quiet and apologetic. "Shanice, I need to talk to you." She unlocked the door and opened it. Vincent stood there looking genuinely pained, but she could already see the resignation in his eyes. She knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. She could hear it in his voice. But that didn't change what happened next. "But Mr. Harrington is a major investor in the restaurant group. He owns a percentage of 6 locations, and he's demanding that I let you go." Just like that. 2 years of perfect service, 2 years of arriving early and staying late, 2 years of memorizing orders and learning wine pairings and building relationships with customers who specifically requested her section. Gone. Erased. Over. Before I continue, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story gets intense, and you'll want to follow along for what happens next. Trust me. "I understand," Shanice heard herself say, even though she didn't understand at all, even though it was the most unfair thing that had ever happened to her. But what was the point of arguing? What was the point of fighting? Men like Marcus Harrington always won. That's how the world worked. She cleaned out her locker in silence. A spare uniform, the comfortable shoes she kept for double shifts, a photograph of her mother from healthier days, a birthday card from the kitchen staff. She put it all in her backpack and walked toward the back exit, the one the employees used so customers wouldn't see them coming and going. As she passed the small window that looked out into the dining room, she stopped. She couldn't help herself. She looked through the glass and saw Marcus sitting at his table laughing with his friends. The spill was already forgotten. His suit had been cleaned up. He probably already received his free meal, his profuse apologies, his assurances that the incompetent server had been dealt with. He was drinking wine now, an expensive bottle that cost more than Shanice's weekly groceries, and he was smiling, completely unbothered, totally at peace. Her humanity had already been erased from his mind. She was nothing to him, less than nothing, just an inconvenience that had been swiftly removed. Shanice felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been dormant, something that had been waiting. And then she remembered the file. The one she'd found 3 weeks ago while working her second job as a night cleaner at Harrington Tech headquarters. She'd been emptying the trash in one of the executive offices, doing the invisible work that people like Marcus never noticed, when she'd seen the folder on the desk. It was late, after 2 in the morning, and everyone had gone home. The office was supposed to be empty. The folder was labeled Chen Algorithm, Original Files. She opened it, not because she was nosy, but because something about it felt wrong, and what she found inside made her stomach turn. Marcus Harrington wasn't the self-made genius he claimed to be. He hadn't built his empire from nothing in his garage, like all the interviews said. He'd stolen it. Stolen the algorithm that made him billions. Stolen it from a young programmer named David Chen, who died in a car accident 6 months after being fired from Harrington Tech. No family to fight for him, no one to ask questions. His work buried, his name erased, his legacy stolen by the man who was now drinking $1,000 wine and laughing while Shanice lost her job for spilling water. She'd photographed everything that night, every page, every line of code with David Chen's signature, every email exchange where Marcus had threatened David, had demanded he hand over his work, had promised to destroy him if he ever told the truth. She'd saved it all to her phone and then to a cloud drive, not knowing what she would do with it, not knowing if she'd ever have the courage to use it. Shanice stood in that back hallway, her backpack heavy on her shoulders, and pulled out her phone. She opened the photo gallery and looked at the evidence. Lines of code with David Chen's signature, emails with Marcus's name on them, undeniable proof that everything Marcus Harrington had built was a lie. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could delete these photos right now, go home, find another job, keep her head down like she'd always done. That would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But then she thought about David Chen, a young man whose brilliant mind had been stolen and erased. She thought about her mother, who taught her to stand up for what was right, even when it cost you everything. She thought about Marcus Harrington's face as he called her this, as he dismissed her humanity with a single word. And then she made a decision that would change everything. The tech conference was packed. 3,000 people filled the San Francisco Convention Center, the largest gathering of tech innovators, investors, and entrepreneurs on the West Coast. The air buzzed with excitement and ambition. Everyone who was anyone in the tech world was here. And on the main stage, bathed in bright spotlight, stood Marcus Harrington. He looked different than he had at the restaurant 3 weeks ago, more polished, more rehearsed. He wore a casual blazer over a black turtleneck, the uniform of tech billionaires who wanted to look humble while standing in front of a screen showing their $12 billion net worth. His smile was warm and charming as he delivered his keynote speech about integrity in innovation and lifting up the next generation of entrepreneurs. The irony was suffocating.
"We have a responsibility," Marcus said, his hand gestures perfectly timed, his pauses calculated for maximum impact. "To create not just profitable companies, but ethical ones. To build technology that serves humanity, not exploits it. That's why I started Harrington Tech. That's why I wake up every morning. To make a difference." The audience applauded. Some stood. Marcus smiled humbly, as if embarrassed by the praise, even though he clearly loved every second of it. Shanice sat in the back row, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone around her could hear it. She'd used her last $200 to buy a ticket to this conference, money she'd been saving for her mother's next round of medication, money she couldn't afford to spend. But she'd spent it anyway because she knew Marcus would be here. She knew he'd be giving this speech, and she knew this was her moment. She'd borrowed a professional outfit from her cousin, a navy blue blazer that was slightly too big, dress pants that she'd had to pin at the waist, heels that pinched her feet but made her look like she belonged among the startup founders and venture capitalists filling the room. She'd styled her hair differently, pulled it back in a way she never wore it. She looked like she belonged here, like she was one of them. Nobody recognized her as the waitress who'd been humiliated and fired 3 weeks ago. Nobody saw her as this. Here, she was just another ambitious professional in a sea of ambitious professionals. The keynote ended to thunderous applause. Marcus took a small bow, that same humble smile on his face, and then opened the floor to questions. Hands shot up all over the auditorium. Reporters, entrepreneurs, students hoping to get noticed by asking intelligent questions. Shanice's hand went up too. She kept it raised even as Marcus pointed to other people, even as she was ignored again and again. But she didn't lower it. She wouldn't lower it. Finally, an attendee sitting near her noticed and handed her a microphone. The gesture was kind, but the person had no idea what they'd just done, what they'd just set in motion. Shanice stood up. Her legs felt weak, but she locked her knees and kept herself steady. 3,000 faces turned toward her. The spotlight swung in her direction, and for a moment she felt exactly like she had in that restaurant, exposed, vulnerable, small. But then she remembered David Chen. She remembered her mother. She remembered Marcus calling her this, and she found her voice. "Mr. Harrington," she said, and her voice carried through the microphone, clear and strong, filling the massive space. "I have a question about David Chen." The change in Marcus was instant. His face became hard, his body stiffened, his eyes, which had been warm and engaging just seconds ago, went cold and calculating. He scanned the audience, trying to find the source of the voice, trying to see who had dared to speak that name. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, his mind clearly racing. "Who? Before I continue, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story gets intense, and you'll want to follow along for what happens next. Trust me."
David Chen, Shanice repeated, louder this time. The programmer who actually created the algorithm your entire company is built on. The one you claimed you developed in your garage when you were 22. The one whose work you stole before he died in a car accident 6 months after you fired him. The room erupted, not with applause, but with shocked gasps and sudden movement. Cameras swung toward Shanice. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, phones out, recording everything. The energy in the room shifted from celebration to something else, something dangerous. Marcus's jaw clenched. She could see him calculating, trying to figure out who she was and how she knew. His hand moved toward his ear, probably signaling security through an earpiece. "That's a serious accusation," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "And it's completely false. Security, please escort this woman." "I have the emails," Shanice interrupted, her voice steady now, strong. She wasn't the scared waitress anymore. She wasn't this. She was a woman with the truth, and the truth was powerful. "I have the original code with David Chen's signature on every page. I have your correspondence where you threatened him, where you told him if he ever claimed the work was his, you'd destroy him, where you promised him equity and then fired him the day after he handed over the final algorithm. I have everything." She pulled out her phone with one hand. With the other, she pointed to the large screen behind Marcus that had been displaying his presentation slides. A tech journalist named Aaron Kim, sitting in the front row, had been waiting for this moment. Shanice had contacted him that morning, had shown him a preview of what she had, and he'd given her access to override the presentation system. The screen behind Marcus flickered, and then the first email appeared. From Marcus Harrington to David Chen. Subject line, "Final warning." The room watched in stunned silence as email after email appeared on the screen. Marcus's own words, his own threats, his own admission that David had created something revolutionary and that Marcus was taking it. The original algorithm code appeared next, every line marked with David Chen's digital signature, dated 2 years before Marcus claimed to have invented it. Marcus Harrington, billionaire, philanthropist, self-made success story, was being exposed as a fraud, a thief, a man who'd built his empire on a dead man's stolen genius. People in the audience were standing now. Some were filming, others were shouting questions. The moderator was trying to regain control, but nobody was listening. Shanice's voice cut through the chaos. She looked directly at Marcus, and this time he was the one who looked small. "You asked me if I understood English that night at Bellinote, when you humiliated me in front of everyone, when you called me incompetent and suggested I was a diversity hire. I understand perfectly, Mr. Harrington. I also understand code. I understand justice, and I understand that the same people you dismiss, humiliate, and erase, the people you don't even see as human, we're the ones who see everything. We're the ones who clean your offices at night. We're the ones who serve your food. You're invisible to us, but we see you." Marcus Harrington's face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Security was moving toward Shanice, but the reporters were blocking their path, demanding answers. And Shanice stood there, in her borrowed blazer and painful heels, and watched the most powerful man she'd ever met realize that he had finally been caught. The fallout was nuclear. Within 48 hours of Shanice's revelation at the San Francisco Innovation Summit, Marcus Harrington resigned as CEO of Harrington Tech. The announcement came through a brief press release that avoided taking any real responsibility. It talked about stepping down to focus on personal matters and allowing new leadership to guide the company forward. But everyone knew the truth. He hadn't stepped down. He'd been pushed, forced out by a board of directors who were scrambling to save the company's reputation and their own investments.
The board launched a full investigation into the origins of the algorithm that had made Harrington Tech billions. Tech journalists who'd once written glowing profiles of Marcus now published exposés tearing apart his carefully constructed image. The garage startup story that had made him famous was revealed as a complete fabrication. Interviews surfaced where Marcus had plagiarized not just David Chen's code, but his ideas, his vision, even his words. David Chen's family came forward, cousins who'd lost touch with him in his final years, who'd never known the details of his firing or his death. They'd been told it was just a tragic accident, just bad luck. They'd never known that 6 months before that car crash, David had been destroyed professionally by a man who'd stolen everything from him, a man who'd threatened him into silence, a man who'd erased his name from the very technology he'd created. Michelle Chen, David's younger sister, filed a lawsuit on behalf of the family. The case was ironclad. Shanice's evidence made it impossible for Marcus or his lawyers to deny what had happened. The emails were real, the code was real, the theft was undeniable. The tech world erupted in scandal. Other former employees of Harrington Tech started coming forward with their own stories. A pattern emerged of Marcus taking credit for other people's work, of using his power and money to silence anyone who challenged him, of building his empire on the backs of people he considered beneath him. But for Shanice, the most powerful moment came 3 weeks after the conference. She was in her small apartment, the one-bedroom place she shared with her mother, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Is this Shanice Williams?" A woman's voice, soft and emotional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Michelle Chen. I'm David's sister." The woman's voice broke. She was crying. "I'm sorry, I know you don't know me, but I had to call. I had to thank you." Shanice's throat tightened. She sat down on her worn couch, the one she'd bought secondhand 5 years ago, and pressed the phone to her ear. "You gave my brother his name back," Michelle said through tears. "For 6 years he's just been gone, just a sad story we didn't talk about because it hurt too much. But you gave him justice when no one else would. You made sure people knew what he created. You made sure he mattered. Thank you so much." Shanice stood in her small apartment, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't done this for recognition. She hadn't done it for money or fame or gratitude. She'd done it because it was right, because David Chen deserved to be remembered, because people like Marcus Harrington had gotten away with erasing people like her, like David, for too long, because someone needed to speak up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Before I continue, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story gets intense, and you'll want to follow along for what happens next. Trust me. The settlement came 2 months later. David Chen's family received royalties from the algorithm their brother had created. Millions of dollars that should have been his, that should have supported him while he was alive, finally going to the people who loved him. They established a scholarship in his name for young programmers from underrepresented communities. Shanice received a reward for her whistleblowing. The tech industry had a fund for people who exposed fraud and corruption, and her case qualified. The amount was substantial, more money than she'd ever seen in her life, enough to pay for her mother's medical treatment for the next 5 years, enough to finish her degree without working 3 jobs, enough to start the scholarship fund she'd always dreamed of creating for students like her who were working their way through school while supporting their families. But more than money, more than recognition, more than any material reward, she'd reclaimed something that Marcus Harrington had tried to take from her that night at the restaurant: her dignity, her sense of self-worth, her belief that speaking truth to power actually mattered. She ran into Marcus one more time, months later, at a coffee shop near her campus. She was there studying between classes, her textbooks spread across a small table, a cheap coffee going cold beside her laptop. She looked up and saw him standing in line, alone, no entourage, no assistants, no reporters following him. He looked different, smaller somehow.
He wore an ordinary suit, not the expensive designer clothes she'd seen him in before. His shoulders were hunched, his face looked tired and older. He was just a man waiting in line for coffee like everyone else. No longer the billionaire king, no longer untouchable. Their eyes met across the coffee shop. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She saw recognition flash across his face, saw him remember who she was, saw him remember everything. And then he looked away, looked down at his phone, pretended he hadn't seen her. Because what could he possibly say? What words could bridge the gap between the man who'd humiliated her and stolen another man's life work and the woman who'd brought him to justice? Shanice ordered her coffee and left. She walked out into the sunshine and realized something profound. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his acknowledgement. She didn't need him to admit what he'd done to her specifically, or to David, or to all the other people he'd hurt and erased over the years. She'd already won. Not because she destroyed him, but because she stood up, because she refused to stay silent, because she chose integrity over fear. Power isn't found in wealth or status. It's not measured in bank accounts or job titles, or how many people know your name. Real power is found in integrity, in standing up when it costs you everything, in giving voice to the voiceless, in refusing to let injustice go unchallenged, even when challenging it puts you at risk. The people you underestimate, dismiss, and erase, they're often the ones holding the truth you fear most. The waitress you humiliate today might be the whistleblower who exposes you tomorrow. The janitor you ignore might be the one who sees what you're hiding. The people you treat as invisible, as this, as less than human, they see everything. And one day, they might just decide to speak up. Treat everyone with dignity. Not because it benefits you, but because it's right. Because every person you encounter is fighting battles you know nothing about. Because the measure of your character is not how you treat people who can help you, but how you treat people who can't. And karma always collects. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually the universe balances itself. The truth comes out. Justice finds a way, and the people who built their empires on lies and theft and the erasure of others, they fall. They always fall. Because you can't build something lasting on a foundation of injustice. Eventually, someone like Shanice Williams will come along, will find the evidence, will have the courage to speak up, and when they do, everything crumbles.